they increase contractile proteins, so we can contract a muscle harder, faster. We get stronger. That's what makes us stronger, that increase in contractile protein. So they literally make us stronger, faster, increase in the load we work, which in turn does more damage to the muscle tissue. And then they make us nitrogen positive, which means we absorb protein more effectively, so we recover faster. So they literally make us bigger, stronger, faster. That is it. That's how they work. But no, they're not going to make us stronger if we don't exercise, and they're not going to make us bigger if we don't damage muscle in order to repair it in the first place. Orals, bar one, which I think might be anavar, I always get it mixed up, don't engage with the androgen receptor in muscle tissue. They engage with non-genomic and genomic receptors that are in the muscle themselves, and effectively what they create is precursor muscle fiber. So orals have a different mechanism for growth, and as a result they are complementary when added to an injectable cycle. However, oral administration of any drug is just about the worst way you can do it, apart from possibly topical. Obviously, now oral anabolics are fat soluble, so if you eat them with non-dietary fat, they'll pass through your system, so they want to be eaten with soluble fats. Fish oil would be ideal to take with your orals, and obviously they can inflame and upset the stomach line. They do stress the liver. They are 17 alkylated compounds, which means they have to withstand breakdown by the liver, otherwise they wouldn't work. If they weren't 17 alkylated when they passed through the liver the very first time, the liver would destroy them and they would have no effect on your body at all. So, because of that, they do stress the liver. Stress from orals on the liver is going to be akin to what you'd get from painkiller use, antibiotic use. They're not liver killers that the reputation precedes them with, but they do create stress. Oxymethylone has got a reputation for destroying livers, yet it's prescribed to children at 1 milligrams per kilo. So it's very obvious it's not. However, I personally am a fan of putting orals at the back end of cycles, not the beginning. You see, lots of people will front load cycles with orals. Why would you want to get your liver all stressed, which can affect your appetite, and then leave it stressed for the rest of the cycle? For me, I'll put them in the back half. That way, one, I get a psychological boost, because around 6 to 8 weeks I'm starting to get bored and I'm fed up of jabbing and it's not important anymore and everything's sort of gone off the boil. So by adding a compound in at that point, it sort of perks me back up again, mentally. But two, that way when I finish the oral use, I'm off. So any liver stress is done. I'm not trying to carry it then through another 6, 7 weeks of a cycle. The individual compounds all have effects. Now we talk about steroids in terms of side effects, but to be truthful, they're not. They're effects. Test converts to estrogen. That's not a side effect, that's what testosterone does. A side effect is an unintentional effect of a drug. That isn't. That's what test is supposed to do. That's intentional. Test converts to DHT. Intentional. DECA converts to DHN. Intentional. These are all actions that these drugs do. If you want to learn how to optimize drug use, you need to learn what the drugs do. Then you can manage them. Most people don't have problems with steroids. Where are you going? I'm going to start.
Wait a second, I just forgot my bottle.
Is it that bad already?
Oh, it's this one. Thank you.
We generally fall into problems with drugs, not because drugs do bad things to us, but because we misunderstand how drugs work. DECA does not cause erectile function. Dysfunction, should I say. DECA increases DHN and increases prolactin. They can affect our libido and erectile function, but if you manage those effects of DECA, you have no problems. So it's not the drug that's the problem, it's your inability to manage its effects correctly. That's where you go wrong. All compounds have said effects. The difference between person to person is how sensitive we are to those effects. And that's unique to every individual. So to an extent, you're only going to find that out by trial and error. Simple way, start low, see how you go, build on that. Start with one compound. Once you're confident with one, move to two. Once you're confident to two, then you can maybe look at adding an oral to 2 injectables, or you can look at the more complex compounds that are trickier to manage, like Tren, DHB, drugs like that. But it is really down to just learning what the drugs do, and then picking the right drug for the job you're trying to achieve. There was no way I was walking around at 415 pound, 190 kilo if you want to speak metric, on a course of test and prima bowling. Not in a million years was I going to get to that size on prima. But all of a sudden, just lately, everybody thinks they can grow into a mass monster on prima. And then they're taking 2.5 grams of this stuff, and then they wonder why their cholesterol's sacked to shit. And they're going to have a heart attack in 4 years' time. Pick the right tool for the right job. If you're going towards a competition, you want to be lean, you're going to lean more towards non-aromatizing drugs, because then you don't have the issue with estrogen management. DATs are going to be your choice. If you're wanting to bulk, you're going to move much more towards estrogen-based drugs, because estrogen is one of the best compounds on the planet for growing big. You do not want to slam estrogen if you want to get big. Estrogen has a key role to growth, which is why old school test, D-Vol and DECA works so well, because it produces estrogen. And if your diet's right, and you don't get your protein sources from KFC or McNuggets, then there's no reason why you should get fat from drugs. You get fat from calories. You don't get fat from drugs. Doesn't matter how many drugs you take, I'm not going to gain weight until I start putting too many calories in. So, a lot of drugs have gained reputations over time which are not true to what they are. DECA, causes erectile function. I've run clients on 300 tests and 1.5 grams of DECA. No problems whatsoever, apart from the fact they grew very big, very quick. So I say it's about picking the right drug for the job you're trying to achieve. The only drug where I would say is an exception to the base of, as long as you manage it, you're going to have no problems, would be Tren. Very, very powerful drug. Very toxic. And the one thing you'll learn about steroids very quickly is the bigger the bang they produce, the more it's going to cost you. Tren has, from what we know, and this is half the problem, Tren's a veterinary drug. It was released as parabolin by a French company in the 70s. It was withdrawn from the market for no apparent reason. They never released why, and it's never been on the market before. It is now currently only available as a veterinary drug. It's used to make cattle big. Tren's a very strange compound. Its metabolites are incredibly resistant. They've actually found Tren in rabbits that are fed off the leaves that the cows have shit on. Alright, they weren't growing, it's only the metabolites, but it is incredibly robust compound. One of the big issues with Tren is that high binding affinity that I mentioned earlier. So Tren not only engages with the androgen receptor, it engages with the estrogen receptor and acts as an estrogen agonist, making that receptor more sensitive. It binds with 5-AR, lowering DHT. DHT is a natural protective action against gyno. In fact, if you have natural gyno, one of the treatments is DHT cream to be rubbed into the nipple. Tren removes the DHT and then increases the sensitivities of the estrogen receptors at the nipple, making you very, very prone to gyno when you're on it, even though it in itself has no impact on estrogen levels whatsoever. It doesn't aromatize. Tren and DECA, being part of the NOR19 family, lower dopamine, because they bind with dopamine transport proteins, which means dopamine cannot cross across the synapses, and as a result your active dopamine levels drop. One of the things you see in people that use DECA or Tren and recreational drugs is you'll see an elevation in their recreational drug use, because they don't get the dopamine hit anymore, and the first thing they think is, I'm taking shit gear. There's nothing wrong with that, mate. It's because your dopamine receptors are buggered up by the other drugs you're using. Tren binds with neuron receptors. It binds with cannabinoid receptors, making us not want to be around people. One of our oldest depression mechanisms is to seek out company, which is why the saying comes from misery loves company. It's part of our fundamental way to manage depression, is we look for company. Tren shuts that system off. There's been some crap posted around the last 12 years or so that you need Tren in the cycle because it's anti-catabolic. Every fucking anabolic drug is anti-catabolic, that's why they're called anabolic compounds. They bind with a called a glucoreceptor, which switches off our catabolism. What Tren does is it binds with that receptor so strongly, it does switch off catabolism, but it also switches off our inflammation response, which is why Tren inflames the body so much, because our bodies can't cope with it because that system's been shut down. They kill brain cells. It's toxic to the liver, to the kidneys. Tren causes acute direct kidney damage. It's the only anabolic that does. Anabolics will cause kidney damage through secondary actions, thick blood, high blood pressure, things like that. But they don't have a direct action to the kidneys. Tren does. The paranoia through increased neuron activity and the downregulation of GABA can be permanent with Tren. So about 50% of people that suffer with paranoia and anxiety from Tren are stuck with it for the rest of their life. When they come off, they don't get rid of it. You can learn to cope with it, but the damage is there. There's studies out of Oslo University now, granted, they're not the most scientific of studies that Ingrid has done, but what they do show is, across the board, without doubt, that Tren causes cellular damage in the brain. Powerful drug, but used very, very sparingly, and when it really is justified. With oral compounds, I said the main issue around there is going to be inflammation of the liver, which in turn will affect the appetite or distress of the stomach itself directly. Otherwise, you're limited really because it's just an ineffective way to get a high dose of drugs into your system. I've only ever known of one case of liver cancer from oral anabolic use, and he was on 200 milligrams for 4 years straight. So it wasn't really a surprise. You've got to take the piss, is the bottom line. If you're sensible, you minimise your usage 6 to 8 weeks, you keep your doses of moderate to reasonable, and you'll get away from it. I mean, I've run 200 mg of oral, I've run 100 mg of 200 mg of Anavar. My liver's brand new, and I've taken the piss with drugs. Around 5 grams for 7 months straight, and a gram and a half of that with Tren. Tren doesn't bother me in the slightest. It knackered my kidneys, but it didn't bother me in any other way. Which is potentially really a bad thing because the damage is being done and you're not seeing the side effects from it. If you're sensitive to Tren, then it's probably a good thing because you know straight away it's not a drug for you and you're not going to take it and damage yourself without realising it. From a health point of view, moving away from the drugs, the main areas of concern, but the biggest area of concern is your heart. One of the issues around blood work is that it's not going to tell you whether your heart's healthy or not. But it will tell you about factors that will affect your heart health. Blood thickness. If your blood is thick, you're going to increase blood pressure. If you increase blood pressure, the heart wall, the myocardium, will thicken in response. The other thing is testosterone reduces myocardial elasticity. It stops the flexibility of the heart. So we end up with this big pump bang in the centre of us, the thick wall that doesn't flex very well. Because it can't flex, it can't do a full beat. Because it can't do a full beat, it ends up doing 1.5 or 2 beats to every one it should be doing, and you end up with atrial fibrillation. Altering heartbeat. That in turn will lead to heart problems and potentially heart attack. If it gets to the point where it can't complete a beat at all properly, then you have what's known as heart failure. That's both of them. Because your heart fails to beat correctly, so therefore it fails to push blood around your body correctly. So your heart is probably the biggest area of concern. If you can, try and get at least an echo annually or every 2 years, and an ECG at least annually. And there is one thing you can do to help your heart health that will will help better than any supplement you can buy on the planet. Cardio. Hard cardio. Not walking on the treadmill listening to a podcast. Especially not one of mine. That'll probably kill you. Hard cardio. Maximum effort. High intensity cardio. You need to be cardiovascularly fit. And believe it or not, that single thing will go further to managing your health than any supplement you can purchase, any drug you can buy. Yes, sir. I'd do 3 hit a week. 20 minutes minimum. And the thing is, you can do it in different ways. You know, you can play a game of football. Or something that allows fast, energetic spurt. The thing is, when you do something like that, you've got to make sure that you're not walking back from the goal line back to, you know, you're running back. You're making sure you exercise as hard as you can within the period you've got. I use a bike. I use a Peloton. I find some dozy bugger shouting at me through a screen really helps me do something, otherwise I can't be asked. So there's all different ways you can do it, but get it in. It will not affect your muscle growth. In fact, the fitter you are, the faster you'll recover when you train, the more intensely you'll be able to train, and the harder you'll be able to train, therefore you'll stimulate better muscle growth. So, I mean, if CrossFit can grow the size them buggers grow, and some of them girls are scarily big, alright, there might be chemicals involved, we're not going down that line, but, and they do basically hit work every time they train, that's all they do. There is no way HIIT cardio is affecting your ability to grow muscle. It's only going to make you fitter and healthier. Blood thickness, all anabolics are going to increase hemoglobin and red blood cell count, which in turn is going to thicken your blood. Simple fix, a blood bank or blood donation. However, if that's not available, native kinase, IP6 are both very good at lowering blood thickness.